She was vibrating. That's the only way I can describe it. Literally vibrating with a frequency of pure, unadulterated rage while standing on the gravel of my driveway, wielding a clipboard like it was the stone tablets from Mount Sinai, and screaming that she was going to have my truck seized, crushed, and the bill sent to my mother. I didn't yell back. I didn't puff out my chest or try to intimidate her. I just leaned against the doorframe of my farmhouse, hit record on my phone, and waited for the moment that would eventually cost her everything: her reputation, her freedom, and the little plastic crown she'd been wearing for 15 years. But looking back, I realized that moment wasn't the beginning of the war. It was actually the end, the final explosion of a powder keg that had been sitting under the pristine, manicured lawns of Sovereign Hills for a decade, just waiting for a guy like me, a guy who just wanted to grow some heirloom tomatoes and be left alone, to strike the match. My name is Caleb Vance, and for the record, I never wanted to be a hero, and I certainly didn't want to be the guy who put a 60-year-old grandmother in state prison. I spent my 20s chasing ambulances and political scandals as an investigative journalist in Chicago, living on coffee, cigarettes, and the high-stress buzz of the newsroom, until the burnout hit me so hard I forgot what silence sounded like. I wanted out, I wanted grass that wasn't in a park, I wanted a porch, and mostly I wanted to never hear the word deadline again. So when I found the old Miller place, a scruffy, slightly tilting farmhouse sitting on 3 acres of overgrown land, just on the edge of a shiny new development called Sovereign Hills, it felt like fate. The listing agent, a nervous guy who kept checking his watch, mentioned casually that while the house was surrounded by the subdivision, it was technically a grandfather parcel, meaning it predated the development and, crucially, was exempt from the homeowners association. To me, that wasn't just a detail, it was the selling point. I signed the papers, packed my life into a U-Haul, and drove south with visions of fixing up the old barn and drinking bourbon on the porch while watching the sunset. And for the first 3 weeks, that's exactly what it was: heaven, until the morning I found Patricia Thorne standing in my flower bed. Patricia, or Patty as her terrified minions called her, was the president of the Sovereign Hills HOA. A woman who wore pastel blazers like armor and possessed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It just sort of bared her teeth in a way that signaled danger. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at my truck, a beat-up 2015 Ford F-150 that had seen better days, and taking notes on her little clipboard. When I walked out and offered a friendly good morning, she didn't introduce herself. She just tapped the paper and said, "Commercial vehicles are not permitted in driveways overnight, and that shade of blue on your shutters is not on the approved swatch list." I chuckled, thinking she was joking, a fatal error, and explained that I wasn't part of the HOA, that my deed was clear, and that I could paint my shutters neon pink if the spirit moved me. She stopped writing, looked up at me with this dead, shark-like stare, and said the words that would haunt me for months. "Mr. Vance, we are a community of standards, and geography does not exempt you from decency. You will comply, or we will make you comply." She turned on her heel and marched back to her pristine white Lexus, leaving me standing there with a half-drunk cup of coffee and a sinking feeling in my gut. I thought I could brush it off. I thought I could just ignore her like you ignore a bad Yelp review. But 3 days later, the letters started coming. The first one was a courtesy notice regarding my grass height, which was exactly 3 inches, by the way, followed by a fine for unauthorized outbuildings referring to the barn that had been standing there since 1950, long before her precious subdivision was even a blueprint. I did what any rational person would do. I wrote a polite email attaching my deed, the county survey maps, and a highlighted section of the state property code, proving I was an independent entity. I thought that would be the end of it, just a clerical error cleared up with some paperwork, but I was thinking like a journalist, dealing with facts, while Patty was operating like a dictator, dealing in power. Her response wasn't an apology. It was an escalation. A week later, I came home to find a tow truck backing into my driveway. The driver, a confused kid named Mike, showed me a work order signed by the HOA authorizing the removal of abandoned junk vehicles. I had to threaten to call the sheriff before he'd unhook my truck, and as he drove away, I saw a white Lexus parked down the street, window rolled down just enough for a pair of sunglasses to peer out. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a siege. The isolation tactics started next, and they were subtle, insidious things designed to make me a pariah in my own home. I'd wave to neighbors walking their dogs, people who had been friendly the week before, and they'd suddenly find something fascinating on the sidewalk to look at, avoiding eye contact like I was contagious. I found out later that Patty had sent a community-wide email blast labeling me a hostile transient and insinuating that I had a criminal record that made me a threat to the neighborhood children. It was a masterpiece of vague fear-mongering. She never said anything legally actionable, just enough to make mothers pull their kids closer when I drove by. It wears you down, being the villain in a story you didn't write, and for a while, I considered selling. I thought, is this worth it? Is this the peace I wanted? I was sitting on my porch late one Tuesday, staring at a pile of fines totaling $4,000 for violations that didn't apply to me, when a shadow detached itself from the hedges across the street and scurried up my driveway. It was Arthur Pym, the HOA treasurer, a sweaty, nervous little man who looked like he was constantly expecting a ceiling tile to fall on his head. He didn't come to the door. He stood by the barn, motioning for me to come down, and when I got there, he shoved a crumpled envelope into my hand. "She's going to put a lien on your house," he whispered, his eyes darting around like we were in a spy movie. "She's done it before. She'll fabricate the debt, file the paperwork, and by the time you fight it in court, she'll have drained you dry." I asked him why he was telling me this, why he was betraying his queen, and he looked at me with this profound, heavy sadness and said, "Because she made me sign the checks, and I can't sleep anymore." He vanished into the night before I could ask another question, leaving me with the envelope. Inside wasn't a threat, but a clue, a single sheet of paper, a printout of an obscure LLC registration for a company called Sovereign Solutions, listed at a P.O. box in a town 3 hours away. That sparked something in me. The old itch, the instinct that had helped me expose corruption in City Hall years ago. I went back inside, brewed a pot of black coffee, and opened my laptop. I didn't sleep for the next 48 hours. I started digging, not into the HOA bylaws, but into the money, because if there's one universal truth I learned as a reporter, it's that whenever someone is obsessed with rules, they're usually hiding a crime behind them. I pulled the public tax records for every house in Sovereign Hills and cross-referenced them with the county clerk's deed transfers for the last 5 years. A pattern emerged, faint at first, then glaringly obvious. Over the last decade, 12 homes in the neighborhood have been foreclosed on by the HOA for unpaid fines, mostly minor infractions that ballooned into thousands of dollars in legal fees, and every single one of those homes have been sold at auction for pennies on the dollar to one buyer, Sovereign Solutions, LLC. I dug deeper into the LLC. The registered agent was a lawyer in a strip mall, but the managing member, buried under 3 layers of shell companies, was a trust. And the beneficiary of that trust? A woman named Patricia T. Davis. Davis was Patty's maiden name. She wasn't just a power-tripping Karen. She was running a slow-motion real estate racketeering scheme. She would target vulnerable residents, widows, people who had lost jobs, outsiders like me, bury them in fines, foreclose on their homes, buy them through a shell company, and then flip them 6 months later for a massive profit. My hands were shaking as I printed the documents. I had the smoking gun, but I knew that in a small town, evidence isn't enough. You need leverage, and you need a spectacle. I couldn't just go to the police. Patty had half the town council eating out of her hand at the annual Rotary Club dinners. I needed to catch her in the act. I needed her to show the world exactly who she was. I reached out to the lawyer I used to work with in the city, a shark named Sarah who lived for destroying bullies. I sent her everything, the deed, the harassment logs, the shell company trail. She called me back 10 minutes later, laughing a low, dangerous laugh. "Caleb," she said, "we're not just going to sue her. We're going to dismantle her life. But first, we need her to overreach. We need her to do something so undeniably illegal that no amount of Rotary Club handshakes can save her." So I set the trap. I stopped responding to the letters. I let the fines pile up. I even parked my truck on the lawn just to twist the knife. The reaction was immediate. I received a certified letter, on official legal letterhead from the HOA's attorney, stating that due to excessive noncompliance and outstanding debt, The HOA was exercising its right to seize and secure the property within 48 hours. It was a bluff, legally impossible since they had no jurisdiction, but it was the overreach we needed. I set up cameras, GoPros hidden in the birdhouse, a DSLR in the barn window, and my phone in my pocket. I waited. Saturday morning, at 8 a.m. sharp, the cavalcade arrived. Patty didn't come alone. She brought a locksmith and 2 private security guards who looked like they'd failed the police academy entrance exam 3 times. She marched up the driveway, that clipboard in hand, looking like a conquering general. I stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand, and that's when the vibrating started. She didn't even say hello. "Mr. Vance," she announced, projecting her voice so the neighbors peering through their blinds could hear. "Since you have refused to pay your debts to this community, we are taking possession of this property to satisfy the lien. You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises before I have security remove you." I stayed calm, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my voice steady. "Patty," I said, using her first name just to irk her, "you know you don't have the authority to do this. This is an HOA land. You're trespassing." "I am the authority," she screamed, and that was the clip, the soundbite that would eventually be played in a courtroom. "We are seizing this property by force, if necessary. Open this door, or we will break it down." She gestured to the locksmith, a terrified guy who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, and he started drilling into my front door. That was the line. Destruction of property. Breaking and entering. I pulled out my phone and said, "Patty, smile. You're live." I wasn't actually live, but she didn't know that. She lunged for me. Actually tried to grab the phone, clawing at my arm, screaming about privacy laws completely unhinged. The security guards hesitated, realizing this wasn't a standard eviction, but Patty was in a frenzy. "Get him," she shrieked. "Get him off my property." "Your property?" I asked, stepping back. "Like you own the Johnsons' old house? Like you own the Widow Miller's place? Does Sovereign Solutions LLC own this one too, Patty?" The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she was going to faint. She froze, her hand midair. "How old are you?" she whispered, and for the first time, the mask slipped. She wasn't a queen. She was a terrified crook who realized the vault door had just clicked shut behind her. "I know everything, Patty," I said, my voice low. "I know about the trust. I know about the foreclosures. And I know Arthur Pym has been talking to the district attorney since yesterday morning." That was a lie. Pym hadn't talked yet, but the look on her face told me I had her. She scrambled back to her car, barking at the security guards to retreat, but the damage was done. I had the footage. I had the drilling on the door. I had the assault. The next 48 hours were a blur of legal motion. Sarah, my lawyer, filed an emergency injunction and a civil RICO lawsuit against the HOA, Patty personally, and the shell company. We dropped the evidence of the fraud, the bank transfers, the deed flipping, the intimidation, right onto the desk of the state attorney general. But the real blow, the one that broke the dam, came from the community itself. I uploaded the video. I titled it, "HOA President Tries to Seize Non-HOA Farmhouse," and I posted it to the neighborhood Facebook group, Nextdoor, and YouTube. By morning, it had 50,000 views. By noon, the local news vans were parked on my lawn, permission granted this time. The emergency town hall meeting that Tuesday was the climax of the movie, the scene where the villain thinks they can still talk their way out of it. The community center was packed, standing room only. Patty stood at the podium, trying to maintain her composure, claiming the video was edited, that I was a provocateur, that she was protecting property values. Then, Arthur Pym stood up. He looked small, shaking like a leaf, but he walked to the microphone. The room went dead silent. "It's true," he said, his voice cracking. "All of it. She made us fine you until you couldn't pay. She took the kickbacks. I have the ledgers." The room erupted. It wasn't just anger. It was a release of 10 years of fear. People were shouting, demanding answers, sharing stories of how they'd been bullied over trash cans and garden gnomes. Patty tried to bang her gavel, shouting for order, but no one was listening anymore. She looked at me, standing in the back of the room, and I just raised my coffee cup to her. The police arrived 10 minutes later, not for me, but for her. They let her out in handcuffs, shielding her face with that damn clipboard. As she passed me, she hissed, "You ruined this community." "No, Patty," I said. "I just gave it back to the people who live here." The fallout was massive. The HOA was dissolved and reformed under a new charter that stripped it of the power to foreclose. Sovereign Solutions was seized, its assets frozen, and the money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, was eventually returned to the family she had scammed. Patty pleaded guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and grand larceny to avoid a 20-year sentence. She got 5 years in minimum security and a lifetime ban from holding any position of financial trust. As for me, I'm still in the farmhouse. I finally painted my shutters a nice, deep navy blue, not because it was approved, but because I liked it. The neighborhood changed after that. The fear evaporated. People wave now, and they mean it. We have block parties where no one measures the grass. But sometimes late at night, I sit on my porch and look at the empty house down the street where Patty used to live, and I wonder about the nature of power. How easy it is for a little bit of authority to turn a neighbor into a tyrant. How silence is just as dangerous as the screaming. I didn't want this fight. I just want to grow tomatoes. But I learned that you can't have peace if you aren't willing to defend the perimeter. And that leaves me with a question for you guys, something I've been wrestling with since the trial ended. I destroyed this woman's life. I exposed her, humiliated her, and sent her to prison. Some people in the comments say she got exactly what she deserved. That justice is a hammer. But others, the few neighbors who used to play bridge with her, say I went too far, that I should have just settled it quietly, that I tore the community apart to prove a point. So, tell me honestly, down in the comments, if you were in my shoes, standing on that porch with the woman screaming in your face, would you have pushed the button? Would you have burned it all down to save your home? Or is there a point where fighting back makes you just as ruthless as the monster you're fighting? I read every comment, so let me know. Thanks for listening, and remember, check your deeds, folks. Check them twice.